Did Jesus have siblings? In the Gospel of Matthew, there's a passage that introduces us to some people called the brothers and sisters of Jesus. Matthew 13:55-56 asks, "Isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't his mother's name Mary? And aren't his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? Aren't all his sisters with us?" Now, that sounds pretty straightforward, right? But here's where things get interesting. The term used here for brothers in Greek is adelphoi. Now, while adelphoi can indeed mean brothers from the same parents, it also has a broader scope. It can refer to cousins, kin, or even fellow believers or countrymen. So the question isn't just what the word means, but how we interpret it in this context. To add to the mix, we have similar mentions in the Gospels of Mark and in Galatians, where Paul talks about meeting James, the Lord's brother. Now, if you're like me, you're probably thinking, wait a minute, does this mean James was Jesus's full brother? And why scholars and theologians have been debating this for so long? Some argue these are indeed his real siblings, born to Mary and Joseph after Jesus. Others suggest these could be Joseph's children from a previous marriage, or even cousins, as per the Jewish custom of referring to relatives. We touched briefly on the Greek word adelphoi previously, which is often translated as brothers. However, in the ancient context, this word didn't strictly mean biological brothers. It's a bit like how some of us might use brother or sister in a religious or community sense today. Theologian 1. In many cultures, including Jewish culture at the time, brothers could refer to any male relative or even close family friends. Theologian 2. Adelphoi in the New Testament is used in various ways, which suggests we need to look at each context individually to understand its meaning. These insights show us why there's so much debate. For instance, in some traditions, like the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches, it's believed that these brothers and sisters are actually Jesus's cousins, or perhaps Joseph's children from a previous marriage. This interpretation supports the view of Mary's perpetual virginity, a key doctrine in these faiths. On the other hand, many Protestant denominations take these words at face value, interpreting them to mean that Mary and Joseph had other children after Jesus. This literal interpretation emphasizes a more naturalistic view of Jesus's family life. Let's look at how the Bible uses adelphoi in other contexts. For example, Lot is called Abraham's brother in Genesis, even though they were actually uncle and nephew. This shows that biblical language can be flexible and cultural context is crucial. Oh, why does this matter to us today? Well, how we interpret these relationships affects how we view Mary, the nature of Jesus's family, and even the infallibility of Scripture as interpreted by different traditions. The perpetual virginity of Mary is a doctrine held primarily by the Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, and some traditional Protestant denominations. It asserts that Mary remained a virgin before, during, and after the birth of Jesus. This idea isn't just a minor detail, it's crucial for understanding the theological context in which the mentions of Jesus' brothers and sisters are interpreted. According to this doctrine, those mentioned as Jesus' siblings in the Gospels must therefore be something other than biological siblings. The belief in Mary's perpetual virginity goes back to the early centuries of the Church. It's cemented by church fathers like St. Jerome, who argued that the brothers of Jesus were either cousins or Joseph's children from a previous marriage. Why is this doctrine so important, you might ask? For many believers, it underscores Mary's special role and purity, which enhances her spiritual significance and intercessory capacity within the faith. It's also seen as protecting the uniqueness of Jesus' birth. Clergy 1. Mary's perpetual virginity elevates her as a model of holiness and obedience to God's will, setting her apart as a figure of devotion and veneration. Clergy 2. This doctrine reflects our understanding of Jesus as the divine Son of God, born in a miraculous way, preserving his mother's virginity as a sign of his divine origin. So, when we go back to the texts and traditions, we see that interpretations can vary widely based on these doctrinal commitments. For those traditions that emphasize Mary's perpetual virginity, the brothers and sisters are viewed through a different lens, perhaps as extended family or spiritual kin. What do you think? Does knowing about this doctrine change how you interpret the Gospels or the figure of Mary in Christianity? While the concept of Mary's perpetual virginity is widely accepted in many Christian traditions, it's not universal. Many Protestant scholars and denominations argue for a more literal interpretation of the Gospel texts, suggesting that Jesus did indeed have biological brothers and sisters. The key to this perspective is taking the Gospel accounts at face value. For example, when the Gospels of Matthew and Mark list Jesus' brothers and mention his sisters, many see no reason to doubt these are his actual siblings, born to Mary and Joseph after Jesus. Isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't his mother named Mary? And aren't his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? And aren't all his sisters with us? That's from Matthew 13:55-56. The direct listing of family members here is seen by many as clear evidence of a larger family unit. The Greek language and the context of these passages support a literal interpretation. These were likely his actual brothers and sisters. If we consider the cultural and societal norms of the time, it would be completely normal for Mary and Joseph to have other children. Historically, this interpretation challenges the more doctrinally driven view of Mary's virginity post-Jesus' birth. It brings us to consider how the dynamics of Jesus' family life might have looked and how they might have interacted as a typical Jewish family of their time. Moreover, theologically speaking, those who support the idea of Jesus having siblings often highlight the human aspects of Jesus' life. They argue that having brothers and sisters would contribute to his experiences and relationships, providing him with a fuller human experience. Imagine Jesus growing up in a bustling household, not just as a solitary child, but as one of several siblings. This scenario paints a picture of Jesus that is relatable and deeply human, grounding his divinity in the reality of everyday family life. So, what do you think? Does the idea of Jesus having brothers and sisters change how you see him or relate to his teachings? Does it affect how you view the biblical texts? The early Christian community was not without its controversies, and the nature of Jesus' family was certainly one of them. A central figure in this debate was Jerome, a scholar and theologian of the 4th century. Jerome famously argued against a contemporary named Helvidius. Helvidius claimed that the brothers of Jesus mentioned in the Gospels were his biological siblings, children of Mary and Joseph. Jerome, however, had a different take. According to Jerome, these references to Jesus' brothers should not be taken literally. He suggested that these so-called brothers were either Jesus' cousins or possibly Joseph's sons from a previous marriage. This was Jerome's way of supporting the doctrine of Mary's perpetual virginity. When the Gospel mentions brothers of Jesus, it could mean any relative, as the Hebrew language doesn't distinguish between brothers and cousins. But the scriptures are clear in their language. Why look for other meanings when the simplest explanation fits? This debate highlights a broader issue in early Christian thought, how to interpret scripture. Jerome's views eventually gained widespread acceptance, particularly among those branches of Christianity that uphold the doctrine of Mary's perpetual virginity. Despite Jerome's influence, the discussion never fully settled. Different sects and scholars have continued to argue the point based on their reading of the scriptures and theological priorities. What's truly fascinating here is seeing the layers of interpretation and the lengths to which early Christians went to defend their viewpoints. It's a powerful reminder of the dynamic and often contentious nature of theological development.
What's your view on Jerome's argument? Do you think cultural and linguistic differences affect how we understand these ancient texts?
Depending on how denominations view Jesus' brothers and sisters, there are significant differences in theological conclusions, especially concerning Mary and the nature of Jesus' family life. For denominations that uphold the perpetual virginity of Mary, such as the Roman Catholic and Orthodox churches, the idea of Jesus having biological siblings is incompatible with their doctrines. Here, Mary is venerated not only as the mother of Jesus, but as a perpetual virgin, which enhances her sanctity and role within the Church. This doctrine influences aspects of liturgy, prayer, and the theological framework around Christ's divine nature and his incarnation. On the other hand, denominations that interpret the brothers and sisters as Jesus' actual siblings, like many Protestant groups, emphasize a more relatable, humanized family setting for Jesus. This perspective can make Jesus' teachings and his life experiences feel more accessible and grounded in a recognizable family dynamic. The contrast is not just in theology, but also in artistic representation and how congregations relate to these figures spiritually.